China is slowly getting back to work after offices and businesses were forced to close in an attempt to contain the coronavirus outbreak. But it's far from business as usual in the world's second largest economy, with many workplaces choosing to remain shut while others have been ordered to work from home. Apple supplier Foxconn and car makers General Motors and Honda have extended their factory shutdowns despite the government's green light to resume production. Beijing says it will provide $10 billion in cheap loans to help companies deal with the cash squeeze and supply disruptions caused by the outbreak. Meanwhile, China's GDP growth is widely expected to slow down further this year from last year's nearly three-decade low of 6.1%. Well, China's economy now accounts for about 17% of global GDP, and it's the largest trading partner of many of its neighbours. One industry that relies significantly on trade with China is India's silk production. Tayyibe Aydin tells us how many now fear for the survival of that sector.
China's new Silk Road, vital for trade routes in Central and South Asia, is also taking a hit from the coronavirus. These garment producers in Varanasi in India have their hands tied due to a halt on trade. They produce the Banarasi sari, one of the finest in India, made from finely woven silk and embroidered with gold and silver threads. But the silk used is often imported from China. With a sari taking from 15 days to a month to complete, traders are worried this could now take much longer since China has suspended the export of 1,500 tons of silk until February 10th. That means losses could be high.
90% of the silk in Banaras comes from China. 90% of our production is going to get affected. According to the data we have so far, the total trade of silk stands at around 9.8 to 11.2 billion. It's been affected by at least 20%, and it can be affected by up to 70%.
Another industry impacted by the coronavirus is India's diamonds. Around 40% of polished diamonds are exported to China and Hong Kong. With the market still shut, traders' payments are also stuck, and their diamonds waiting to be sold.
Our estimated export stands at more than $6.33 billion in these two places. I believe that there will be a total impact of up to $1.12 billion for these 2 months.
As the outbreak continues to claim hundreds of lives, it's also expected to have a devastating cost on the global economy. Tayyibe Aydin, TRT World.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by Helal Miah in Aylesbury in the UK. He's an investment research analyst at the Share Centre, which is an independent UK retail stockbroker. Welcome to the program, Helal, and thanks for joining us. Firstly, as I mentioned earlier, China is slowly getting back to work, but it's still very much far from business as usual, isn't it?
Yeah, that certainly is the case. Although it's officially opened up again, the week-long holiday was extended to 2 weeks. But because of the prolonged shutdown, a lot of the transportation networks, all the buses, the planes and everything else needs to get back into position. And lots of the key workers for a lot of these industries can't necessarily get back to work today. And we've also seen some major companies in China announce that they are going to actually prolong their closure for another week or so. So we're not really going to see the country returning, if there is any kind of normality, if it can return to normal. It won't be until at least early next week. And we are seeing companies asking staff to, if possible, to work from home rather than go into offices.
Now, authorities are rightly consumed by the growing human toll that this coronavirus is exacting, particularly in China. But describe to us what sort of impact that the coronavirus has had on the economic aspect of China's society.
Well, I mean, first of all, it really manifested itself in oil demand. So we've seen oil demand and imports fall by roughly 20% in the first weeks in January. And obviously, we've seen the shutdowns of businesses as well. But in terms of what estimates are for the Chinese economy, in terms of the shutdown in the first quarter, we've seen estimates varying, but most seem to be centred around the 5%, which is a pretty hefty number. And that would have had a knock-on impact on a lot of the countries in the region. So the likes of Hong Kong obviously being next door and Singapore being a fairly open economy. Those economies are taking a pretty brutal hit because of the reduction in Chinese travelers and just the business people not being able to travel. So it really is impacting on the region specifically. And you go further afield, you see places like Australia, that economy is expected to suffer because Australia is a major commodity exporting nation to China. And when these factories are closed, unfortunately, all these products are going to be staying in the ports. And we have also seen contracts being cancelled for imports of oil and various other commodities. So, there is a fairly big knock-on impact in the region and undoubtedly in Western countries as well, such as Europe and America to a certain extent.
Now, what sort of action do investors want to see from policymakers in China and elsewhere, I guess, to reassure them that perhaps the economic fallout from the coronavirus might be contained?
Well, the most important thing is to see the government and health authorities really try and contain the virus. But, fingers crossed on that. Let's hope that they can do that. When it comes to policymakers, let's say central banks, the expectation is that they will always be there to lend the support, like we've seen last year with the trade dispute between China and the US. The Federal Reserve, the Chinese and European central banks were effectively there as a backstop. We're expecting, and part of the reason why the markets haven't really plummeted is the expectation that central bankers will be there. But the key risk here is with interest rates so low, especially in the West, the big fear is that do we actually have enough ammunition should this virus the contagion be far worse than expected. I mean, at the moment, most people are suggesting that the virus, its peak is in the first quarter of this year. That's the central estimate, in some ways, at best estimate. But should the infection spread into the second quarter and the third quarter, that is going to be a scary thought.
It sure will be. Okay, Helal Miah from the Share Centre in the UK, thank you so much for your analysis.